President Trump touting progress following his call with Chinese President Xi Jinping, saying on Truth Social that the leaders discussed trade, fentanyl, the need to bring the war between Russia and Ukraine to an end, and the approval of the TikTok deal. He went on to say the two will meet at the APEC summit in South Korea, and then he'll go to China in the early part of next year. Joining me now to discuss, Ian Bremmer, Eurasia Group founder and president. Ian, it's always good to talk to you and get your perspective on these matters. We did notice that stocks kind of came off their highs after we started to get these headlines. I mean, you know, it's all sort of seems vaguish from these two sides. What do you think came out of this call? How productive was it?
It's a short call, and it shows that there is a desire to engage in serious negotiations, because if you're doing a summit meeting, you want to have something that you're going to be able to announce. And so no one was expecting any breakthroughs on any of this, but it's very different. I mean, you couldn't have a more different dynamic from where we were in the weeks after Liberation Day. The United States and China had essentially imposed trade boycotts on each other, and we're also looking at a significant decoupling in the near term. That is not where we are right now at all.
Well, so where are we exactly? And will the result of where we are be better than where we were pre-Liberation Day in the prior tariff regime?
I think it'll be more stable. So in that regard, it'll be more predictable. And, you know, in the pre-Liberation Day run-up, it wasn't. People were expecting that there were going to be, you know, sort of big hits that the Americans were prepared to take, or else to lots of other economies. And of course, Trump has been, you know, quite hawkish on China in his first term, as was Biden. There's now a shift. We are very close to announcing the details of what this TikTok deal is going to look like. That wouldn't happen unless there was a summit meeting where the Chinese and the Americans are exchanging levels of confidence that they are going to improve their relations. The United States recently reduced some of the expectations for a defense aid to Taiwan, making the Chinese quite happy about that. There's been a lot of talk about restrictions from China on the precursor chemicals for fentanyl export, and those chemicals are needed, so it means a much better capacity for the Chinese to know which customers they're going to and restrict other sales. If that happens, that's going to be a fairly significant piece of the tariffs that come off from the United States. So all of those things are in train. But that's very different from saying that China suddenly is going to trust the United States. No, those summit meetings you saw with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as then with Putin and Kim Jong-un, that's where China's heading. It's building an alternative where they're telling countries around the world, you can't trust the Americans, they're unreliable. You can trust us, work more with us. So clearly, long term, this is going to be about more decoupling and more fragmentation in what had been a more globalized environment.
Well, I'm curious how that message is being received, because on the flip side, we had President Trump meeting with Keir Starmer in the UK, you know, quite a greeting there in terms of pomp and circumstance. Yeah. So how much is, for lack of a better word, how much is Trump winning in this court of opinion around the globe?
He's the most powerful leader right out there, in the sense that, I mean, he can't get everything done, but he has incredible loyalty, and the U.S. is the most powerful country. But that doesn't mean people like him. The United Kingdom is legitimately very friendly in their disposition. Remember, Biden and Obama personally didn't really like the UK. Trump does. He likes the royalty. He owns the golf course. I mean, like, he really does quite like it there. And he was really looking forward to how historic this trip was and all the pomp. And as you say, so that's real. But when you talk to other leaders around the world, not many of them want to have fights with the United States, but almost none of them, you know, have a level of trust for the U.S. and the U.S. president. And so there is a problem that the United States is no longer really thinking about the long term, that the U.S. is undermining its relations with other countries and making them want to hedge away from the U.S. long term. No conflict near term, unless you're China or a country, or Russia, a country that feels like they have the cards and can stand up to Trump and stand up to the Americans. Most countries can't stand up to the Americans, but they also don't want to be in a position where they have to have this vulnerability in the future, and that bodes badly for the U.S.
Ian, as you know, the UN General Assembly set to begin Monday. World leaders will be gathering here in New York City. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged world leaders to, quote, get serious and deliver, highlighting things like peace, climate, responsible innovation, gender equality, development financing, UN reform as central themes of the week. None of those things, I think it's safe to say, are the priorities of President Trump. He will be addressing the UNGA. So given those dynamics you were just talking about, how does that play out next week? What do we need to be watching for?
Well, I spoke at length with Antonio on Monday. He's a good friend. And we were talking about these themes and the reality that the G7 is not united in their support for rule of law, multilateralism, and the UN. The BRICS are not united in coordinating policy, in creating an alternative. But if the United States and the G7 don't stand up together, that the alternative is going to be other countries will have much more influence, most notably China. And I mean, look, the Chinese have long been the last country to pay their dues in arrears, usually right along with North Korea. Just last week, they decided that they were going to pay up a couple $100 million to the UN. Why would they do that? Why would they support the UN when the Americans aren't? Precisely for that reason, because they recognize that they can make a lot more appointments to the Secretariat. They can have a lot more influence over the UN organizational structure if the Americans are going to decide that they no longer care about this institution that, of course, was originally a U.S. creation in America's image. It's a big opportunity for China. It's not just them eating America's lunch on the global stage. It's that the United States is actually catering the meal.
So, Ian, all of that said, you know, our bread and butter here at Yahoo Finance is the markets and the economy. Markets are doing great here in the U.S. Stocks are doing great. Yeah. The economy seems to be doing just fine, which has defied a lot of the dire pronouncements about what this whole tariff battle was going to result in. And so going forward, I mean, what you're talking about, this remaking of the global order, does it seem like the U.S. can kind of be fine, even given all of that?
That's long term. You don't care about the long term. You're Yahoo Finance. You care about the short term. You care about the markets. Deficit spending is great. You're not going to have to pay for that bill, not in today's market. The U.S. is great at the short term, and we have a president that is great at the short term. So if I'm an investor in short-term markets, I don't worry about any of this.
Well, I mean, over the long term, stocks go up too, right? So is there anything longer term in the scenario you're painting that will eventually be an economic disaster?
Well, again, anyone that looks at America's trade deficit and the lack of benefits that are coming from it, long term, you're not going to be able to pay for Social Security or health care. That's a long-term hit. Again, people aren't, I mean, there are no, Rand Paul cares about this. There are no other members of Congress that care about this because it's not a near-term concern. Long-term, when you tell Brazil, the largest economy in Latin America, that you're going to hit them really hard, not because they have a trade deficit you're running, you actually have a trade surplus with them, but because they're doing something you don't like, their Supreme Court with the former president in upholding their own rule of law, they are now hedging their trade with Mercosur, together with the EU, with EFTA, with India, with China, with everybody else. Long term, that means less trade with the United States. Long term, that means cost of goods will go up. That means there'll be less efficiency. I mean, if you're telling people that they're not as welcome at Harvard or they're not as welcome as immigrants in the U.S., you're telling South Koreans they're not as welcome. You're telling brown people they're not as welcome, and there are a lot of very talented brown people around the world, then long term, that's going to affect the American economy and the markets. But again, the revealed preferences of the U.S. government and its leadership, Republicans and Democrats, or that the long term don't matter. So we should just embrace this, especially on Yahoo Finance, and say, let's smoke them while you got them. I mean, that is what capitalism today is all about in the U.S.
Well, that's sort of depressing, isn't it, Ian?
Not if you're in the markets today, it's not.
Sure.
Of course not.
Yeah. Something finally I want to get your take on to just go in a different direction is the Jimmy Kimmel situation. And I ask you this through the lens of that you have been a student of, global geopolitics. You have seen what, for example, state-run media looks like in other places. Is that what the U.S. is going to? And I mean, again, one would think there would be implications for people who invest in the media companies, for example.
Well, the fact that there was a major merger that was going to reflect billions of dollars, that the FCC was saying basically would be very sad if something were to happen to that merger. There was economic pressure placed directly by the Trump administration to remove Kimmel. And that's what they've done. And obviously, that money is more important than standing up for this guy whose ratings were not great. And, the principle of independent media is less important than the money. So, I mean, you said you were moving to something else, but actually we're talking about the same thing. I mean, you're not going to see courage from CEOs in attacking a U.S. political system that they are fully invested in, even if it doesn't necessarily align with classical liberalism, openness, freedom of speech, and free market competition. It's very clear that there are many, sort of CEOs out there that are prepared to be quiet and comfortable and not have a fight in this environment. I understand that. I mean, that is what shareholders are demanding. But it probably means that democracy is going to get a lot weaker. If Trump's intention is to undermine opposition speech, if he wants to weaken the left, if he wants to weaken media that criticizes him, and there are many examples of leaders that have done that, Erdogan in Turkey, Orban in Hungary, not just dictators, but people that were legitimately elected, but then worked to use their position of power to unwind the legitimacy of their free and fair elections. Trump is taking steps along that spectrum, and he's being facilitated by people that don't want to lose money. That's kind of where we are.